There we go.
Hi, everyone online. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Welcome for those that are joining. We are doing this hybrid, so we are waiting for a couple folks to filter in the room. So just sit tight. We'll start in the next 2 minutes. Thanks. Matt, will you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Hopefully we can manage this as a hybrid presentation.
Wait, what is even? Okay, I just sent it to that. And so let's see. Was trying to pass regulations that they've been done with a lot of college, but part of your grant had a plan in there. That we did state laws about bikes. Which to me seemed like a bad idea. Among other things.
When did I not know that you were with someone?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to those who have joined. Here in the room, so you're welcome to come. We've got cookies and coffee if you want to come down here.
Very
And
it's.
hello,
You're
Mike.
lost and try to solve issues.
But we're very glad to have you.
Yeah,
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Hopefully we can do
I feel better about it. Homelessness.
Yeah. Awesome. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're doing this as a hybrid meeting. So some of us presenters are here in the room at the swing space in the Capitol. And we're gonna do our best to control both audio and video so you can see us as we're speaking. But welcome. This is the e-bikes and e-motos in California policy briefing, hosted by Senator Catherine Blakespeare's office. I'm Jeannie Wardwaller. I am a lobbyist with Fearless Advocacy, and my client, People for Bikes, is one of the co-sponsors of the bill with Senator Blakespeare. So we're really excited to be hosting this informational briefing, and also happy to have the other co-sponsors of SB 1167 here with us, as well as the Mineta Transportation Institute, and Professor Asha Agrawal is also joining us to share some of her findings. So with that, I'm going to get started. Feel free, if you're online, to put questions into the chat. We will keep an eye on the questions, and we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. All right.
They're not clicking.
Of course, now it's not working.
We've tested it so many times. Is that it?
Far away. Nadia. Sorry, we're having trouble advancing the slides. Worked perfectly earlier.
One clarification while we get the slides going, if you can actually use the Q&A function for any questions, it just helps keep them all in one place. If you have any technical issues, please put those in the chat. And if you did submit questions ahead of time, you have those accessible as well.
Thank you so much. All right. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to hand it to Nadia in a moment to provide a welcome from Senator Blakespeare's office. Kendra from CalBike is going to sort of give us some background on why it's so important to preserve access to legal e-bikes. As I mentioned, we're going to hear from Dr. Asha Agrawal from the Mineta Transportation Institute on the findings from her report, which I know many of you are familiar with. And then Matt from People for Bikes is going to talk about the e-moto challenge and SB 1167 and walk us through the sections of the bill. And then we'll end with some notes from Mark and Dave from the other co-sponsors of SB 1167 on their perspectives as well. And as I mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A, so hopefully you'll hang on for questions at the end. Right. Nadia, I think I'm gonna hand it to you here, so maybe we can use the slide.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think that this is a really important briefing because when I started learning about e-bikes 2 years ago, it was overwhelming and confusing and hard, and I want to have as many people avoid that as possible. So that's why we're here today. Senator Blaisdell, thanks you for coming as well. E-bikes are really popular in her district, which is the southern part of Orange County and the northern part of San Diego County. We get a lot of constituents and law enforcement and local governments wanting to ban these darn kids off e-bikes doing wheelies. Always with the wheelies. I don't know the obsession with wheelies, but that exists. And so I've done kind of an overview training for our district offices to help them feel more comfortable talking about it. And so even if you don't staff transportation, if you're interacting with people out in the world about e-bikes, it's really important to know what e-bikes are, what they're not, more importantly, and what makes good e-bike policy. Thank you, everybody.
All right, so thank you so much, Nadia. Sorry that we're changing seats here, so that you can see us online. All right, so I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I will hand it off to Kendra. I'm going to introduce all of them, and then we'll sort of transition between them. But I'll introduce them up front now. So Kendra Ramsey is the executive director of CalBike and has spent the past 18 years working in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors to increase opportunities for everyone to safely walk, bike, and take transit. She serves on the boards of the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals and the local chapter of the American Planning Association. Dr. Asha Weinstein Agarwal works at San Jose State University, where she is a researcher with the university's Mineta Transportation Institute, a professor of urban planning, and the program director for an online graduate program in transportation management designed for working transportation professionals. Matt Moore has served since 2022 as policy counsel for People for Bikes, working with their government relations team to help craft bicycle and bicycle business friendly legislation and regulation at the federal, state, and local level. Matt has volunteered in bike advocacy for almost 20 years, helping to grow his hometown, Minneapolis, mountain bike trails, improve Minnesota's cycling laws, and lead national advocacy efforts at the League of American Bicyclists, the Bicycle Product Suppliers Association, and on People for Bike communities. Mark Buksevich is Director of State Policy at Streets for All, an organization dedicated to biking, walking, transit, and smart land use decisions. Mark oversees all Sacramento affairs for the organization, supported by a team of dedicated volunteers. Dave Owens is an attorney, avid cyclist, and legislative analyst. Your streets are for everyone. Thank you to all of these speakers for providing their expertise. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Kendra. You can already see on the screen, but I'll pass you the mic.
Thanks, Jeannie, and thanks for everyone for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefit of legal e-bikes. So to back up a little bit, CalBike is, I'll essentially say, we're the voice of the everyday bicyclist in the state capitol. So we mainly focus on helping it be safe for people to get from here to there on bikes anywhere in California for whatever purpose they are on their bike. And a lot of you probably already know this, but legal e-bikes, there are 3 classes in California and in 41 states throughout the country. Class 1, 2, and 3. A class 1 e-bike, as you will see me riding in this picture, goes up to 20 miles an hour with the rider assisting the whole time. My daughter is slightly bigger than that, but they are good for carrying cargo, including small children. You can have a larger e-bike that is good for also carrying adults. I have ridden on the back of Jeannie's e-bike, in fact. It has a larger seat. It's a cargo bike and can carry groceries as well. Mine is not as good at that. A class 2 e-bike goes up to 20 miles an hour with or without pedal assist. So it does have a throttle. A class 3 e-bike requires pedal assist and it goes up to 28 miles an hour. So those are the legal types of e-bikes in the state of California and in about 41 states throughout the United States. In California, these are bicycles. That's a very important component. They are bicycles. They have all the rights and responsibilities of bicycles in the state of California. They offer mobility options for people where traditional bikes might not be an option. So that's folks that are going longer distances. Folks that might have cargo that's a little bit too heavy or cumbersome for a traditional bike. Like for me, when I was thinking about how am I going to get my toddler around, I live in downtown Sacramento. Traffic is a nightmare at many times a day. I live on one side of downtown. Anyway, it is a lot easier to get that 40-pound toddler on that bike than it would be on my regular bike with that seat. It's a lot safer. And I don't arrive very sweaty. And so I'm going to take the bike for a lot more trips than I would if I didn't have an e-bike. Or if I were an older person or someone that maybe didn't have the same physical fitness level for whatever reason. And there's also about 30% of our community across the country that cannot drive, whether it's for age, physical ability, or other reasons, that don't have access to a car. And so those folks need a sustainable transportation option. Well, they need another transportation option. And the state of California has set goals to move folks into sustainable modes of transportation. And so electric bicycles, legal electric bicycles are an excellent option for that and are a big part of our climate solutions, whether or not they get the same kind of splashy treatment across the media as electric vehicles do. But it really does open up mobility options for a lot of people that a lot of distances that regular bicycles aren't going to do. More bikes on the road, more drivers can see that bicyclists are out there and can know to look for them. That helps with safety in numbers. The more often folks driving see bicyclists, the more likely they are to look for bicyclists when they are out there. Also, the more likely they are to understand that bicycling is a form of transportation. It kind of changes folks' mindset. So that kind of helps with people. Oh, yes, those are just where they need to go and not just those pesky bicyclists, those darn kids, get out of my way. It also helps, like I said, California has goals around climate change. A lot of our communities are trying to plan our way out of traffic congestion and a transportation planner by training, as Jane mentioned. We are trying to get out of traffic congestion, getting folks out of their cars when they can and when they choose to is a great way to do that. And e-bikes are one part of that solution. And that's, those are some of the reasons that e-bikes are a really big part of the puzzle. And, there's Dr. Agrawal will tell you about a great piece of research she did. And one of the ways to keep e-bikes as part of that solution is to maintain our ability to use legal e-bikes in California. And we really want, I really want to maintain my ability to, do my transportation trips when I choose to. And it's really all about providing those options to people throughout California.
Awesome. All right, with that, our next speaker is Professor Agrawal. So I'm going to move and hand her the mic. I'm gonna try.
Does this work for those online?
Yeah, really nodding.
They can't even hear me ask.
Can you hear Professor Agrawal?
Let's try again, test first.
This work, we'll all be able to hear me.
It's not as good for me. If you,
Okay. Seems like you have to hold it, sorry.
That's okay.
Just
All
get it in
right.
front of your face.
Well, thank you very much to Jeannie and everybody else who's organized today. I very much appreciate the chance to share research that I've been doing over the last few years, looking at e-bike safety. So, that's right. Sorry. So this work was actually conducted as part of a larger study that was commissioned by the California legislature through California Senate Bill 381 in 2014. And we were tasked with trying to learn essentially everything we could that would help policymakers answer the question, how do we promote e-bikes, make them accessible to people, but also maintain a clear sense of public safety and what policies might be needed to ensure reasonable safety. And so it really comes down, and this is sort of what Kendra was just talking about, but this question of, how we balance the very real benefits that e-bikes offer, both to many individuals, but to society more generally, against also very real safety concerns that a lot of people are worried about. The one thing I will add, coupled to what Kendra said, I mean, e-bikes are very affordable mobility, so that's another benefit for many people. Also, in the terms of thinking about, well, could e-bikes actually improve safety? Yes, they raise their own questions, but I like to ask people, would you rather be hit, let's say you're a pedestrian, would you rather be hit by a crazy driver in a car or a crazy e-bike rider? And I think probably anyone listening to me right now would take their chances with the e-bike rider rather than a car. But then there are the real safety concerns. And I like to think about that, both the risks to the riders themselves and of course, everybody around them in the environment. So e-bike riders can be injured or killed both from collisions with motor vehicles and what in transportation we would call solo crashes. So that's somebody who, say, hits a curb and falls off, something like that. But a lot of what we hear also from, I think, people writing to their representatives and in the media are other road users who feel that they are endangered by e-bike riders. It's rare, but there are a few very unfortunate cases where pedestrians or others or a non-e-bike cyclist have been injured or killed by somebody on an e-bike. And then I think there's also there's sort of aggressive, reckless groups of people or sometimes solo people who just intimidate other road. And because those people acting so aggressively on e-bikes sort of gets focused on the technology maybe more than needs to be. So anyway, those are the challenges to try to balance. So what I'm going to do today, talk a little bit more about, well, what is an e-bike or an electric bicycle? What we know and don't know about sort of use and ownership of them. Run through what I think are useful sort of constructs or questions to ask ourselves when we're trying to understand the safety issue. Then share what we've learned from sort of research literature and data about, well, how dangerous are e-bikes? And then finally run through just very quickly a number of the policy options that our report had recommended. So it's actually a deceptively difficult question to define what an e-bike is. There are all kinds of things that people call e-bikes, but that doesn't necessarily meet legal definitions. So my answer is, when is an e-bike an e-bike? Is it depends who you ask. So what I think the general public, frankly, most, policymakers, law enforcement, people working in hospitals with patients, when they hear electric bicycle, they think of what I'll call a bicycle-shaped device with an electric motor. So 2 wheels, pedals, and a battery in a motor. However, that is not legally what an e-bike is, and I'll first mention federal definition and then how states. So the federal government defines only devices they call low-speed electric bicycles. And these are these bicycle-shaped objects, and they have to have an electric motor with a maximum wattage of 750 watts. And they should bring the rider with assisted speed past 20 miles an hour. Any other device that doesn't fit into that, the federal regulations don't really have anything to say really on. So the states, California, like most states, fall somewhere in the middle. They define electric bicycles more broadly than that very limited federal definition, but they also don't consider any bicycle-shaped device with an electric motor to be legally uncompliant. So this is what Kendra already went over, but again, it's got a bicycle. I do want to emphasize that the wattage can't be more than 750 watts. And then there are these 3 classes, which unfortunately people have trouble, I think, remembering them. The first 2 both cap your assistance 20 miles an hour, but the difference is that with class one, you always have to be pedaling, whereas class two can operate more like a moped where you twist something or push a button and there's a throttle that propels you forward. Class three doesn't have the throttle, but it will take you with an assisted speed up to 28 miles an hour. And again, I want to emphasize, and I'll keep talking about this until you may be a little tired of it by the end of my presentation, but there are a lot of other devices on the road that don't meet this definition. I also do want to just put quickly into context. So what's the 750 watts of power? And there's some debate about whether the law refers to continuous or peak power, but a lot of the manufacturers have been interpreting it as continuous power. So if we think of an average adult, anybody in this room who's able to bicycle, maybe they can generate vaguely, I don't know, 100 watts of power for, biking across town. If we were all pro cyclists, we would be able to generate continuously for some time, maybe 300 watts, something in that general range. 750 watts of power is literally 1 horsepower. 800,000-pound animal, not running, but putting all that power to propelling a bicycle. So it is genuinely quite a lot of power. Now, I'm not actually a professor. I like to give quizzes. This isn't the real quiz, but one of the problems we have, there are all these bicycle-shaped devices. Some of them are legal e-bikes, some of them are not. It's very hard to tell. And it's hard for consumers buying them to know. Certainly, it's hard for somebody on the street who sees a device go by to know, is that an e-bike or not? Some of what you see here is legal. I think the first three, maybe some of these are definitely not by any stretch of the imagination. And then there's some that it's sort of a gray area where some people would argue they're legal, maybe retailer would, but others would say no, they are not. So what are these devices that are easily to confuse with a legal e-bike? So some are designed by the manufacturer to switch between classes. So the marketing collateral says, hey, you can, with the switch of a button, you're either a class 2 or a class 3. That is now by statute in California not allowed. You can't have these switches of devices. Secondly, you have devices that by design offer more power or higher assisted speeds than what California law allows. Then we get into devices that maybe the manufacturer doesn't explicitly give you more power or assisted speeds, but the device inherently has enough motor power and battery to do a lot more than what's legal. And either the manufacturers in the past have actually told you essentially how you can override the limits, or there are, there are also, so where, and this is less common now in California, but where the manufacturer actually tells you, hey, you can unlock your e-bike. And then we have users who choose to so-called unlock their bikes, and so they go faster, more power. Sometimes that's by downloading a third-party app that you can buy for $2 on Amazon. For those who have, a little bit more ambition or mechanical skills, you can cut wires and make other physical changes to the bicycle. Another last point I want to make, which is that e-bikes by law in California have to have a sticker that says whether it's class 1, 2, or 3. However, Amazon and other online vendors are full of fake e-bike stickers. There's a little picture here, one that I looked up yesterday. So it's, anybody can just go online and buy an e-bike sticker and slap it on their device, which makes it that much more difficult, even if you don't have the device in your hands, to easily know if it's legal or not and what classes. So now let's turn to, what do we actually know about how many e-bikes are out there and what kinds and how are people using? Unfortunately, the short answer is not much. There is very little good data and almost nothing about California specific, but I'll share the few things we were able to find. One thing to think about is how many devices are out there. What is the fleet, if we want to say, the national fleet of e-bikes?
And this little chart is showing you the number of devices that kind of were likely in circulation each year. So by 2025, this is very hand wavy, but about 7 million electric or bicycle shaped devices with electric motors have been sold in that country. By the way, if you compare 2025 to 2020, that is a growth of 49 times. So there has been, we've gone from almost no e-bikes to many, many more in just 5 years. Sorry, I keep hitting the keyboard instead of the clicker. So what do we know about, well, how many people are actually using e-bikes? There have been 3 national surveys that were done in 2024 and 25. And this was just of adults, so 18 and over, but they all found kind of generally that around 10% of adults in the country, at least occasionally, use an e-bike. That doesn't mean they're regular riders, but maybe they once or twice a year minimum. Unfortunately, we don't have any available data on how many kids use e-bikes, which I know because a lot of the safety concerns relate to use of this. Now, what do we know? I've mentioned that there are, roughly 49 million of these bicycle-shaped devices with motors that have been sold. Well, how many of them are legal e-bikes? And then within those, how many of them are class 1, 2, or very poor data. There is one market research firm that estimates that in 2024, about 40% of the devices sold were class 1. And they also observed that they felt that the fastest growing market segment is these not legal devices that have motors that are longer than 750 watts. A second piece of information, which I think is very relevant, and this is California specific, and it also does relate to kids. Again, I know that many people, I think, interested in state legislation on e-bike safety are very concerned about kids. So a number of advocates have gone to school campuses with principal permission in some Bay Area counties and during the school day, and they observe all the bikes that kids have parked on campus. And for anything that has a motor, they've kind of documented or taken pictures of the brand, et cetera, and they go home and look it up online and figure out, is this a legal e-bike or not? And it's, in my opinion, I actually thought there was an error, but it seems not. Very consistent from county to county. About 88% of the devices parked on campuses were not legal e-bikes. So virtually all were not legal e-bikes. And I think, well, maybe the people who are doing the estimations, maybe they made some mistakes. Maybe they were off 20% of the time and these are actually legal e-bikes. Well, that would still leave us with 2/3 of the devices not legal. And so as we go forward and we hear data about crashes, especially among youth, it's important to keep in mind that we don't know, this small set of data from a few schools in Northern California, it doesn't equate to what every teen in California is doing, but it's kind of a good hint that a lot of the so-called e-bike incidents don't involve illegal cuts. So that's a quick snapshot about what we know about sort of how many are out there and what kinds and how many people use. So let's turn now to thinking about if you really want to understand how dangerous are bikes, how serious is the safety issue. Let me walk you through some of the questions to ask or things you would want to know. First of all, there are a number of different sources of data that we can look at. Hospital records, hospital patients get interviewed about why they're in the hospital. Similarly, if an ambulance picks you up, they'll make notes about why you're injured, death certificates. And then if an e-bike is involved in a collision and the police are called and they choose to submit a report, so that's a lot of ifs, we also do have data from those police collision reports. So there are many different sources we can look at, but unfortunately, they all have major limitations. One is this
point I've just mentioned, and by now hopefully you're getting bored of me, but at least you'll remember, that many of these so-called e-bike incidents are not going to be legal e-bikes, but we don't have a good way of knowing what proportion. Secondly, even if by some miracle we actually get, legal e-bikes separated out from everything else, there's almost never any documentation about what class. And a lot of the kind of policy suggestions have been, for example, to say, well, let's let kids ride class 1, maybe, but not class 2. And unfortunately, we don't know, and maybe these class 2 devices are a lot more dangerous, and that would be an appropriate limitation, but we don't have any evidence to really help us understand that. And then finally, this is true of incidents on, most bicycle incidents, and even many motor vehicle incidents, they're never reported. They're more minor, so we don't know about them. For the more serious ones, it is more likely that it will end up in a police report or a hospital. Now, what we'd like to know, I think, if we're going to set good policy based on a true understanding of the danger e-bikes do or don't pose, is we would like to know how many incidents occur and also how severe they are. That we sort of know, and I'm going to share some data in a minute. We would also really, though, like to know about sort of the rate of incidents. So we could think of that as, the likelihood of an incident per trip or per mile bicycle. But for that, we would need to know how many miles people are bicycling or how many actual trips are made, and we absolutely have the data on that. I also think because a lot of the legislative discussion talks about creating rules for e-bikes that are different from the rules for human-powered bikes or mopeds or other device types, we really want to understand how these e-bike incidents either are similar to or differ from these other modes. If the incidents, for example, are very different from human-powered bikes, then maybe it's appropriate to have different rules. If they're pretty similar, perhaps not. And then finally, and there's almost no evidence, but we would really like to know, well, what are the factors that are connected with e-bike injuries? Is it specific roadway designs? Is it, characteristics of the riders or the behaviors of not only the riders, but the other people in the street around them? If we knew more about that, it would certainly help us to design safer streets for them. So with all of those sort of concepts to consider in mind, what do we actually know? So I'm going to run through a few key findings and then after that share a couple of some concrete data points. So first of all, we do know the number of e-bike incidents, crashes or injuries has been rising fast. And you will see a lot of media headlines, 350% increase or whatnot. That is absolutely true. I just do also want to remind everybody the context that the number of devices is also going up very quickly. Secondly, we know that while there are very concerning e-bike crashes and fatalities, and it is absolutely appropriate for our both local and state legislators to be thinking about what we can do to improve safety. At the same time, the number of people injured in an e-bike related crash is tiny compared to most other modes. Third, of the sort of medical data that we have, that people treated in hospitals for e-bike injury are somewhat more likely to have a serious injury compared to people with a conventional bicycle. The majority of reported e-bike incidents so far, and that we have data for, so there are a lot of caveats here, involve adults. Again, I think a lot of the conversation relates to kids, and absolutely we need to be thinking about kids, but we shouldn't forget this is also an issue for adults. And then finally, just some caveats as you think about those five overall findings. First of all, most of the reported incidents probably, well, many, maybe most, but we don't know, but some proportion, I'm positive, and fairly large proportion are not legal. Secondly, these are overall findings I'm giving you, and certainly there are some local data sources here and there that show quite different findings, maybe a much higher proportion of youth, or much more serious, higher proportion of the e-bikes being medically serious. And also at the time I was doing this work, we had very little data from 2025, and the situation is changing. More people are getting e-bikes. Different kinds of people are using it. So certainly it's very important to continue to follow the data and new patterns emerge. So now I'm going to show you some findings from two different studies about e-bike injuries. So this here is a chart showing you data from a national study of patients treated in emergency room. And there's a sample of emergency rooms across the country that provide their data. And what you're seeing here is from 2020 to 2024, the number of patients who reported, I'm here in the hospital because of some injury related to me, or bicycles, powered scooters, skateboards, all these other small wheeled devices. So the e-bikes, there's a picture here. Oh no, oh, okay. I just won't touch that again. There's a larger fat red line. There's the red. Those are the e-bike. So what I think most people would take away, somebody showed them this chart, is, well, they're going up. That red line is definitely going up. That's one thing. But secondly, if you were really concerned about road safety and you wanted to pick one issue you could, focus on to protect people, wouldn't really need that. I mean, the line at the hot top, that's pedal bicycles, which is much higher. But even if you look at all the other, there's sort of that cluster at the bottom of all the others, e-bikes are going up, but kind of roughly in there. This is California specific data. Unfortunately, 2023 was the most recent we could get. And again, things may be changing, but at that year, this is all the people who were treated in California hospitals, either as an emergency room patient or someone admitted to the hospital. How many of them were injured because of an electric bicycle? And so for that year, it was about 5,000 patients. And again, we compare it to like scooters and also pedestrians, motorcyclists, conventional bicycles, and motor vehicles. And again, I think if you looked at this and you were trying to pick out like what's the big safety problem, e-bikes literally are the smallest number there. And absolutely dwarfed by the number of people injured as occupants of motor vehicles. So again, I'm not trying to minimize the fact that we have safety issue with e-bikes, but I think sometimes it maybe generates, people think of it as perhaps a more common problem than it is. And it's just important to keep that in mind. So to wrap up, I'm going to just very quickly run through some of the policy options that we recommended after research. First, absolutely important is people need to know what they're buying. And right now, it is incredibly confusing. Most people don't understand the class system, and they don't know if they're buying a device, how to identify, is this a legal e-bike? And if so, is it class 1, 2, or 3? And they need to be educated that there are different rules for these different classes. And so I think that, first of all, and there is legislation that's been introduced, I believe we're going to be talking more about it today, to require retailers to very clearly alert consumers what they're buying. Is this an e-bike, something that can be legally ridden on the streets or not? There is no way we can expect consumers to go do a bunch of online research in the California Motor Vehicle Code to figure out if this cool thing their kid wants them to buy is legal or not. We have to make it so obvious that they can't avoid knowing. And I do think that most of the people buying these illegal devices probably have no idea that that's what they're taught. They thought they're buying this, also their kid the funds and legal e-bike, and they will be shocked to discover it's not. Secondly, I think there's a role for perhaps the legislature to think about ways to sort of facilitate enforcement about, you know, truth in advertising about what these devices are. There is also, and again, there's legislation that's been introduced, those stickers, it's also easy on Amazon, you know, $5, you can buy a new class sticker. And so it would be better to use like engraving in the metal frame or some other more permanent, harder, just, you know, way to identify what the device type is. Something that I think there's less agreement about, but I personally came away from our research thinking we really ought to be thinking about is that 750 watts of maximum power the right sort of maximum threshold? The United States and California are completely out of step with the rest of the world on this. They tend to have limits that are, you know, more like continuous power and more like kind of the professional cyclist level, so maybe 250 and 300 watts, not the force equivalent power that we had in the United States at 750 watts, if you assume that continuous power. So something else to think about. Related to that, I do think that the 3-class system, while it was created, I'm certain with great intentions, unfortunately is just so confusing that most people don't know what it is. And so, and again, this is not something everyone agrees with, but I think it would be much more beneficial to, again, just do what the rest of the world does and have a 2-class system. And have one type of e-bike that is the ones that we consider have functionally performed similarly enough to a human powered bike that it should be regulated the exact same way. No license, you know, age minimums, etc. And then we should still allow faster, stronger e-bikes. Like for many people, they are great and can be operated safely and it's appropriate to use them. But we should create another category for those that's sort of more like the way we treat mopeds. So you would need to be, you know, a minimum age. You have to have a driving license. Everybody regardless of age has to wear a helmet and such. And so this, I think it's just much simpler for people with the classes, not 3, and it also just sort of builds off the already established device categories that we have in our system. Absolutely valuable if we can possibly start collecting better data on how many people are using e-bikes and who, and then what are these incidents, these crashes, injuries, these fatalities. The best way to do that is unfortunately requires, you know, there's not a lot you can do at a centralized level. It's working with local police, local hospitals, local ambulance services to encourage them. In particular, I would say one of the most important things is to get them to document what the device was. They don't necessarily in the fly need to say, well, this was a class 2 or this was not legal, but just to document the make, model, and maybe is there a throttle or not, so that later public health or transportation researchers can start to untease, well, how many of you consider were moving bikes and which class? And then certainly to the extent we can get more data about the circumstances surrounding the crash, that then lets us make good policy to try and reduce the risk. I think that I hope the state will consider supporting research into all of this. So it's not just once we collect the data, we have to actually use it. So this can be directing with state agencies like the Department of Public Health to more rapidly and thoroughly analyze the data they already have, like that hospitalization data I showed you. It can fund researchers in universities or elsewhere outside of government. And then finally, and I think this is absolutely critical, in the world of researchers, there's a pretty strong divide between the public health community and the transportation community. And we each have things we understand and do really well, and we each have big blind spots. And so I think there is enormous value in trying to ensure that a lot of the business goes forward as teams that combine both the public health and the transportation researchers. And then this is one of those things that, you know, I imagine maybe is very obvious to this group, but e-bikes will be safer if we just have safer places in general to ride small wheel devices, whether that's pedal bikes, e-scooters, skateboards, or e-bikes. And so that's redesigning streets, to give people a safe place to ride. So bike lanes is of course a good option. But also, and I've noticed Sacramento is certainly doing a lot of this, redesigning the streets in ways that motorists are just more likely to notice there is a bicycle, particularly when making turns. And, a lot of these are not that difficult or expensive to make those changes. And then my last thing, and again, I do believe that there's a really good role for the state here, but today we're not talking as much about what the rules are for riding e-bikes, but honestly, if you want to know, you're a law-abiding person, you just got an e-bike or your kid did, and you want to be sure you all know what the rules are, literally, the only way to know for sure is your California Motor Vehicle Code, which, trust me, nobody does and should do. It's incredibly confusing. It's not like you can do a quick, Google search. Like, another professor, 2 grad students, we sit there like scratching our heads. What does this mean? So I truly believe the state should publish, the equivalent of the drivers. A plain, simple language. Here are the rules, not just for e-bikes, but really for bikes and other small wheel devices. Because right now, that's not provided. And if you do Google it, you will get a lot of websites telling you here are the rules. They tend to be from bike advocacy organizations and personal injury lawyers. And I make no comment at all about CalBike here, but when we were doing this, most of them were not completely correct. Like they'd be 90 or 95% correct, but they would have an error here or there. And, I don't think that this is the role of advocacy organizations and personal injury or lawyers to educate the public. Really, the state should be doing this for us. And then other educational campaigns just to let people know what the rules are. And I do think there's an amazing potential for bike education in schools to really help reduce sort of the problems that we're seeing with safety, unsafe riding, but also to hopefully encourage people to become lifelong bicyclists and e-bike riders and to do so safely so that we can get all those benefits that were described at the beginning of the presentation. I'm almost done here, but another key one I do think is to try to keep the rules pretty standard at the state level. There are a lot of cities that are concerned and very understandably are trying to think of what can we do locally to take action. But I don't think it is useful to have a lot of local variations in the minimum age to ride or who has to wear a helmet or whether you're on the sidewalk or not, simply because nobody is going to know. Can you imagine if motor vehicle drivers had to know in each city what the minimum age was? Like, well, I can be 15 in Sacramento, but in Folsom, I have to be 16. It's, of course, it's ridiculous. It would not be feasible. And so I worry that when local governments start passing a lot of these rules, they are setting up a situation where it's just not reasonable to expect anybody to know what those rules are. And people move into the communities, they don't know if they've crossed one city border to the next. So in general, I think the rules are best set at the state level, probably though, allowing some very specific place-based local exceptions, but with the caveat they have to be really well signed. And again, since most people in California are drivers, I'll use that as a parallel, but speed limits. We don't expect people to just sort of intuitively know when the speed limit changes from 25 to 35 or whatnot. We have very prominent signs all over the places. So if you have bike facilities with speed limits or that don't allow certain kinds of devices and those sorts of things, that it's critical that we have these very clear signs. And with that, I imagine the slides will probably be shared. And so there's contact information, a link to the 200+ page study, if anyone really wants to dig into that. And in addition, of course, today's discussion, I'm very happy to answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Professor Agarwal. Very rich. I can definitely recommend the report. I have read it. At least for transportation policy stuff, it's a good read. All right, with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Matt, who's got the next section of the presentation. Take it away, Matt.
Oh, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Moore. I'm policy counsel for People for Bikes. I'm coming to you from Minnesota, which is soon to enter onto our fourth winter. But I want to thank Professor Weinstein Agarwal and the Mineta Transportation Institute for that report and for the legislature for commissioning the report. Prior to that, we just had the CPSC study where they investigated, about 100 e-bike fatalities, but provided almost no information about what had actually happened. And there wasn't statistically enough information for them to draw any conclusions. So all we know is that things were increasing and there were no really sound conclusions from that. So next slide, the People for Bikes Coalition. We have 325 coalition members. We're the trade association for the U.S. bicycle industry. We have, of course, many more individual citizen supporters. Our team, small but mighty team, does work at the federal, state, and local level. We were actually formed, part of our organization, the People for Bikes part, was formed in 1999 specifically to secure federal funding for building bicycle transportation facilities, bike lanes, trails, rail trails across the country, which at that time had zero funding. And now the funding is in the many billions of dollars over the past 25, 26 years. So, but we also work on behalf of bicycle manufacturers and with other advocacy organizations to promote safe cycling infrastructure. We publish safety materials. The hotly debated three-class system was created by the bicycle industry to help support adoption of and regulation of electric bicycles as they started to become more popular, on the urban landscape, especially. So next slide. This is my vision test. You can probably find the name of your bike on here. They're in alphabetical order, but we're going to skip past this because we have a lot more important things to talk about. So, as I said, we work on bicycle and electric bicycle policy. What we're seeing, though, as a professor indicated, is a lot of people put everything into one bucket. That's called e-bikes. But a lot of what we're seeing, we see the news reports, the video coverage, and we're like, that, it's not an electric bicycle. What's going on? So there's really this rise, and especially in the last 2 years, of more and more e-bikes on the street. Really, we are seeing our vehicles that are not electric bicycles. They're treated in the media as e-bikes, everything with two wheels and a motor, considered to be an electric bicycle. But the reason I'm here today is that our industry has had to respond to this because of I will call the e-moto industry has not taken those same steps to create, I will say, guardrails around the products that they're manufacturing and selling. So next slide. And here's an example of what we call the e-moto problem, or in general. These devices, they're often sold as e-bikes or electric bikes or even electric dirt bikes. They could have pedals, bicycle gearing or components, head and tail lights. Most all of them have throttles. They're a throttle activated device, even though they have pedals. They may be sold as a class 2 electric bicycle. Sometimes they have street tires, and many times they have fat, knobby tires that might be suitable for off-road use. Typically a bench style seat that's not adjustable. Anyone who, rides a conventional bicycle knows that it needs to be sized, to the rider and adjusted to fit them properly. It's not really possible with most of these e-motos. And most importantly, the motor power is usually well over 750 watts, and the device can travel faster than 20 miles per hour by using the throttle. The reason they're so prevalent now, I think, is because they're sold online rather than in a traditional bicycle shop. If you go into a bicycle shop, you'll talk with a sales consultant. They'll figure out what you need, and for the most part, they'll be selling you a legal, safety certified bicycle or electric bicycle that they've obtained, from one of these I will call legitimate manufacturers that have been around for years in the United States. The key feature of an e-moto that makes it creates such risk for the user is this designed ability by the manufacturer to access the increased power or speed by unlocking the motor controls. Every electric bicycle has a motor control system that has both firmware and software that is used to control the motor power. It monitors the battery, the charge level, and the health of the battery, and it also determines the speed and power assist based on input from the rider. These e-motos will have, of course, they have a control system, but it's relatively accessible by the user. So there'll either be a built-in mode where you can exceed the capabilities of a legal electric bicycle, or there'll be a system setting that the user can change, or you can use a phone app that the manufacturer or third party created to unlock the maximum motor capability and speed of the device. Next slide. Here's an example, and I've highlighted the some of the words to show the confusion. This is the Ghost Cat. This is a brand new model they've just come out with. It's a all-terrain fat tire electric bike engineered to perform as a lightweight motorcycle, or it's a dual sport bike. So a dual sport is a motorcycle that can be used on-road or off-road, provided that it's registered and meets on-road capabilities. So this device, 1,500 to 2,200 watts, depending on how much you want to spend. Top speed, 35 to 42 miles per hour. And it has pedals for reasons that are not mysterious, but are not helpful. So this bike is programmed by the factory for 20 miles per hour, but you can change it. If you do, you change the legal classification of the bike. In other words, the manufacturer is telling you they designed a product that we're selling as an electric bike, but you can change it. You can change it into a motor vehicle by changing the setting. And then there's the fine print. If you do so, it's at your own risk, not advised by us. It's only for use off private roads and public roads. And I love this last one. Driving at high speed is dangerous and puts excessive stress and wear on bike components. So they haven't even used components that are sufficient to operate this bike safely at the speeds they've made it capable of going. They're using bicycle components on a motorcycle. Next slide. This I call the worst offender, the Onyx, 1,800 watts, 65 miles per hour. It has pedals, and it has a class 2 mode that you can operate it at 20 miles per hour if you so choose. And all those other modes, well, those are only for off-road use. Here it is, of course, pictured on a street that's probably in California because they are headquartered in California, as is Ghost Cat and many of these other e-moto brands. Slide, please. This is a new market entrant, super popular, probably the leading product that's being sold right now. It's an electric mini bike, 2,000 watts, 37 miles per hour top speed. They talk a lot about safety, but they show this product being used on the roadway. It has no pedals, can't claim in any stretch of the imagination to be an electric bicycle. They endorse on-street use and promote this as usable for children. So this is a response in their reviews to a mother who said, I've got this for my 10-year-old. They enjoy riding around the neighborhood, with their friends. It's like the best thing ever. And Tudio Sports response, oh, it's so great to hear your 10-year-old is loving their new e-bike. we're glad you did your research and chose our dirt bike. So if you look on the site, tudio.com, you'll see that there's almost no information. There's only one spot where they actually tell you this is an electric dirt bike intended for off-road use. They claim to have sold 600,000 of these across the United States. So it's not just a problem that California is dealing with. Slide, please. So again, in our view, as the bicycle industry, we work to establish clear definitions of electric bicycles at the federal level, and actually 45 states have adopted the 3-class system. What we are seeing with e-motos is deceptive behavior in both in the product design and by the sellers of these devices. So e-motos clearly not electric bicycles, too powerful, too fast, in some cases do not even have pedals. But they confuse the public with electric bicycle features like pedals or this factory setting, and their marketing claims street legal. It can be used on street and off-road, and they have a mode that can limit the bicycle or the e-moto to 20 miles per hour, but it can also be unlocked beyond that. Here they state it's for off-road use only with legal disclaimers. You might have to check a box saying, I know this is for off-road use only. But then they show it almost always being used on public roads in their advertising, sometimes with actual children, performing stunts on public streets, crossing the double yellow line, riding in packs, just demonstrating unsafe behavior. Last, there's a lot of social media content out there in YouTube and TikTok. There are social media influencers that, again, promote this unsafe behavior. A lot of reviewers, so-called e-bike content creators, will do reviews of these products, show you the top speed. Here we're going 55. It's kind of scary. But then it kind of normalizes these products and it creates demand for them and promotes their illegal use on public roads and by children. Next slide. So what should we do about that? There's many approaches have been proposed in California this year and in past years. I think there are about 9 or 10 bills currently, as well as many bills that we track and support or provide input on in other states. So, electric mopeds, motorcycles, and electric dirt bikes are legitimate products. They just need to be defined and regulated by states for use on the roads as the motor vehicles they are. And all of these vehicles that can exceed 20 miles per hour with use of a throttle are actually motor vehicles under federal law. They are supposed to be imported by registered motorcycle manufacturers. They're supposed to be certified for meeting federal motor vehicle safety standards, but almost, to a single unit, they are not. So SB 1167, and thank you to the other groups on this call and Senator Blake Spear's office and Nadia for working with us on this, is really a comprehensive approach to regulating, better defining and regulating e-motos. So first step, clarify what is not an electric bicycle. Make clear that there is a gap between the performance characteristics of an electric bicycle and these other products that are being sold and used. So again, motor power more than 750 watts, goes over 20 miles per hour on motor power using the throttle, or it exceeds 28 miles per hour on pedal assist, or if it's intended to be modifiable to exceed any of those limits, or it lacks pedals, it is not an electric bicycle. An important addition to SB 1167 is this last bullet. If it is a defined vehicle type in the vehicle code, it's another sort of vehicle. And those are almost all motor vehicles other than, bicycles and some other e-mobility devices. If it's a motorcycle, a moped, scooter, off-highway electric motorcycle, any of these other devices, it's not an electric bicycle because it meets that those other requirements. Next slide. Next, as I've said, bicycles and electric bicycles have a variety of federal regulations, including federal CPSC safety standards for such things as reflectors, frame strength, brake testing, and all electric bicycles that are legitimate electric bicycles are tested and certified by their manufacturers as conforming. That is under penalty of law. And if an electric bicycle doesn't conform, or a bicycle, it can be recalled, and the CPSC can and does order those recalls of electric bicycles. E-motos, because they are designed, I guess, to fall between the cracks or live in the gray area that they have themselves created, really do not have to comply with those regulations. They are supposed to comply with federal motor vehicle safety standards if they're designed for use on the road. An electric dirt bike actually has zero mandatory safety standards, and that is where many of these vehicles are now promoting themselves as electric dirt bikes. So the bill will clarify the motor vehicle definitions of a moped. That's a faster motorized vehicle with two wheels, and motor-driven cycles. That's another just slightly higher category, by creating clear definitions that show that they include devices with electric motors, not just more traditional devices that have gas engines. It will require that these devices meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. They need turn signals, they need headlights, they need DOT-approved brake systems and tires to be operated safely and legally on public streets. The bill will clarify that mopeds may have pedals, but pedals are not required, because many of these devices do not have pedals. It will require permanent labels on motor-driven cycles and mopeds. That is an existing requirement in federal law that has been proposed for adoption specifically by California in this bill. And last, electric mopeds, motor-driven cycles, because they are motor vehicles, they can be used if they are registered and the operator is licensed, and other applicable requirements like insurance are satisfied. Now, that will require the operator be over 16. They have an M1 or M2 license. Next slide, please. As we've seen, a lot of this can be traced back to behavior by the seller or the manufacturer, the online retailer, where they are selling products that the public believes are electric bicycles, or they're selling them as e-bikes, but they use strategies to confuse consumers and try and really evade efforts to enforce motor vehicle safety requirements and operation requirements on the street. So the bill language will add off-highway electric motorcycle to the definition of new motor vehicle dealer and vehicle manufacturer. This seems basic. They probably already are subject to this law, but the bill will call that behavior out. They're selling motor vehicles. They are motor vehicle dealers. They need to be licensed in California as motor vehicle dealers or vehicle manufacturers. And I will say that Onyx has recently applied to be a motor vehicle manufacturer and motor vehicle dealer. I think they saw this coming. The bill will require sellers to provide a notice to consumers, as recommended by the Mineta report, that the product they're buying is a motor vehicle. So this is a provision in this bill that People for Bikes worked to adopt as law in Utah and Minnesota previously, and I believe Connecticut also has this requirement for electric mopeds and motorcycles. They need a permanent label. This is another provision of federal motor vehicle law that is required. That a motorcycle has to have a permanent label specifying that it has been certified for meeting federal motor vehicle safety standards. And last, because they're motor vehicle dealers, this last provision is to prohibit the sale of e-bike class labels, that fake class 2 label that has been placed on many e-motos, except in a physical retailer or bike repair shop. So there are instances where someone can add a throttle or remove a throttle from their device. For instance, if they had a device that has a throttle but was a class 3 device and now is not lawful to operate in California, they could have the throttle removed and the dealer would be able to change the label on the device so that it conformed to what the device actually was. Again, if you sell it online to consumer, that supports that strategy of really trying to fool law enforcement into thinking your electric motorcycle is an electric bicycle. Next slide, please. Again, a lot of this goes back to advertising. As I said previously, the ad that doesn't really tell you what you're buying, or that sells you something as one thing when it's another. That's just consumer fraud. There is just one case currently against a manufacturer for selling an e-moto as an electric bicycle, but that, of course, is going to wend its way through the court system over a period of years. So this bill language is far more proactive. It requires this notice by sellers of motor-driven cycles and mopeds to provide this notice in all advertising, including online advertising, that this device is treated as a motor vehicle if it's used on a public road. And advertising or selling a moped, motor-driven cycle, or off-highway electric motorcycle, those are the three types of e-motos, as an electric bicycle is a presumed misleading statement under the California Consumer Fraud Statute. That would be enforceable clearly by the Attorney General, District Attorney, or even by a private party, as California has a very robust consumer fraud statute that provides extensive relief and should warn off any manufacturer that's trying to violate a provision like this were it to become law. Next slide. Lastly, I didn't have any problem reading the California Vehicle Code. I think I have it open on my laptop right now. I mean, it's very straightforward. I mean, but it shouldn't take 40 years of legal experience and 10 years working for the federal court to be able to figure out what that says. And I've actually worked on our Minnesota state bicycle and e-bike handbook. That is just a plain language exposition of what Minnesota's bike laws are. So yes, providing law enforcement, this was a request. It's like, hey, the third bullet here, make it clear that bicycles and electric bicycles, your operator could be charged with reckless driving. That is in fact the case, but it's very difficult to find that in the law. So it involves looking at multiple statutes to figure that out. So the bill would clarify that by just saying, hey, this is an offense, just charge it under this reckless driving statute. But the first bullet would prohibit a device capable of going over 20 miles per hour solely with the motor. Again, that's a motor vehicle, including a device with multiple settings, from operating in a public street unless it's defined in the vehicle code, meets the requirements for those devices, and is authorized to use public roads. So this would address, again, these kind of crossover devices or attempted crossover devices, as well as any kind of a homebrew device that someone could come up with by ordering parts online and then hitting the streets. It allows impoundment of non-compliant or unauthorized devices. I know some jurisdictions are being very proactive in enforcement. They're already impounding illegal motorcycles when they find them. This would just call that out and make it very clear that that is an available tool for law enforcement. And then the last one requiring law enforcement agencies to include information on the vehicle label or that there was no label in crash reports. So again, by requiring labeling on devices and then capturing what sort of device this is, we should get better data on crashes, which vehicle is involved, and then be able to do that analysis of determining, what actually happened here, what led to this crash. And those are, I mean, there's a lot of, there's too much information on how bicycles are involved in crashes. Some of them I've experienced personally, but it's well known the types of case. They have names for them, like the left hook and leaving the sidewalks dangerous, the overtaking crashes, and we don't have that same information about electric bicycles. Last slide. I'm coming on my time. Thank you very much. Here's my contact information.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's been hanging with us. We're just going to quickly hit 2 more speakers. I know there's a lot of information here, so hopefully you can get your questions. Passing it to Mark.
Everyone, yeah, I'll be really brief. I just want to do, sit down here. I just want to do a quick sort of like overview. I was always taught, like, when I give presentations, to make sure that there are like 3 points that everyone's taking away. And so I want to like make my case for the 3 points that I'm hoping everyone takes away from the presentation. And it sort of roughly follows what each speaker said, but not explicitly, not exclusively. But first and foremost, Mark Vuccevic, he, him, I'm the Director of State Policy for Streets for All. We've been working in the legislature for a number of years now. We've been working on e-bike policy for a number of years now, including being the sponsor of SB 1271 by Dave Min, which, as Dr. Agrawal mentioned, clarified some standards around multi-class devices, as well as changed battery standards to address some of the battery fires that were happening a few years ago. And this year we have 10 sponsored bills, 1167 being one of them. So the 3 things that I would encourage everyone to take away, and so I'm going to start with number 1, is that I think e-bikes are awesome. E-bikes are cool. E-bikes are really fun. And I mean that in a sincere way. So right now, e-bikes and scooters account for 4 times as much barrels of oil dropped as electric vehicles at the moment. So the hundreds of thousands of, actually millions of e-bikes that exist across the world right now are reducing demand for greenhouse gas emissions and barrels of oil 4 times more than electric vehicles actually are on the roadway right now. That's according to Ars Technica, and if anyone's trying to check my sources there. E-bikes are fun, and they really bring joy in a world of a lot of serious things going on. I think, like, we shouldn't discount things that are fun and joyous, especially for children. And so, like, if anyone's a parent, I'm not, but I actually really care about this topic. Like, anyone's read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, if you haven't, it's about how kids are anxious because of Instagram and stuff like it. And the courts just proved that this week. The part of the book says the outside world has to be interesting. It's not just that we need to get kids off screens. The outside world has to be really interesting. And so I think e-bikes are a way to actually make that a reality. And I see a lot of, kids and young people like to ride their device for that reason. It also gives them a lot of freedom of mobility, and it stops their parents from becoming chauffeurs, which is a different note. Also, a prior Surgeon General recommendation is to stop having parents be chauffeurs and for their kids. And lastly, I'm working on a coastal bill this year, which a lot of people have different positions on. But I would actually argue that, like, e-bikes have expanded access to the coast in California in ways that, like, no other public policy has in the last 10 years. And I think that's really, really valuable too. So overall, e-bikes are fun. E-bikes are amazing. They give mobility options. They allow people to get to their jobs in different ways. So that's point number 1 that I want people to take away. Point number 2, and that's sort of what I got from Kendra, but that's not exclusively. Point number 2 is, this is a little bit of where I'm going with Asha's presentation, is that there's a ton of complexity in the world around e-bikes. There's ambiguity, there's complexity, and I think the biggest point of all is there's actually a lot of lack of data to answer the questions that we want. And so how are we to sort of like legislate? How are we to set policy? How are we to even message appropriately when we don't actually know the answers? One hypothetical is like, what if e-motos all the crashes around e-motos were happening during the day, but all the e-bike crashes were happening at night? Like, and then that could lead to some really interesting public policy question as to what should we do about that. I'm not saying that's happening. I don't think there's any evidence to show that's happening. But like that fact that we can't answer that question makes it really hard to actually set policy. And so like, with all due respect to any staff who may or may not hear this in the legislature, like, you know, a lot of members, I think, want to run an e-bike bill this year. And I think the challenge is that it's hard to do. It's hard to know what the right approach is. But point number 3 that I want everyone to take away is there is one thing that it seems like everyone agrees on, from the Mineta report to the e-bike companies to the street safety advocates and to a number of members of the legislature, including Senator Blakespeare's office, which there is an e-moto problem or an illegal device problem. We all can agree that the devices that people should be riding, we can quibble on what should be legal and what should not be legal, but at the very least, what we can all agree on is that the things that are illegal on the roadway right now should be illegal and should not be ridden, especially by children, and that they are potentially dangerous to have the both amount of wattage and the amount of speed that they have right now. And I think my big takeaway is that that's what we're trying to do with SB 1167. So we're trying to tackle that problem that industry, safety advocates, academics, members of the legislature all agree is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. And we believe will maybe not be a panacea, but address at least a severe and significant problem on the roadway and a rampant problem. I'll say that I got a text the other day of a photo from Costco of them selling a device that was not legal on California roads. It's not the most egregious device I've seen, but it's not legal. It's not a legal class 1 or class 2 or class 3 e-bike in California. And that's not some weird shady website. At some point, people were saying that these were only sold on Alibaba, and that might have been true at some point. That's Costco. That's a major retailer. Yeah, I think overall those are the 3 things I would encourage you to take. I'll just say it again because I like to teach. E-bikes are fun, e-bikes are joyous, and to over-regulate them or do something that goes too far to the extreme, I think threatens some of the amazing like wins that we've gotten from these mobility devices that have expanded people's options and joy in their lives over the last primarily 5 or 6 years, but really the last 10 years. There's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of unknown and a lot of data questions that I would love to answer. I'm a data guy, but we don't have the data right now. And number 3, there is a clear problem. There's a dangerous problem that SB 1167 is solving. So that's it for me. I'll pass it back. Oh yeah. Yeah. Our last speaker before we get to questions is going to be Dave Owen from Streets Are For Everyone.
I know we've been running along, so I'm going to be extremely brief. I'm a legislative analyst with Streets Are For Everyone, which goes by the acronym SAFE. And what we do is we advocate and work towards safety for anyone using streets. That can be car drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, and of course, e-bike riders. And SAFE, like Streets Are For All, strongly supports the use of e-bikes. They serve many purposes. One that wasn't touched on was recreational use. I'm a very avid cyclist. I don't ride an e-bike. I ride a traditional road bike, but I ride with many groups, including one group that's composed primarily of retirees. And there's a number of seniors in that group, ages 70, 80, one gentleman who's 86 years old riding an e-bike. There's no way they could ride with groups and enjoy the recreational use of a bicycle without the use of an e-bike. So to reiterate what most of the speakers have said is that e-bikes are a great thing, and we really want them to be supported. But we want them to be supported by the use of intelligent legislation. And as Mark pointed out, there are a number of bills currently pending before the legislature regulating e-bikes. We've all worked on SB 1167, which appears to be the most intelligent, comprehensive legislation directed at e-bikes. And the e-motos and what is an e-bike, what's not an e-bike, what manufacturers can and cannot do, and what they can and cannot say. Mark pointed out that Costco is selling illegal e-bikes. If you do a search on Amazon, just searching e-bikes, virtually all of them that pop up, or the majority of them that pop up initially, are illegal e-bikes. So they are just out there and need to be regulated. So SAFE would just urge all of you to support the passage of 1167. Urge your representatives to support the passage of 1167. And since we're running so long, I'm going to leave it at that and just hope that 1167 gets passed. It is necessary and needed.
Thank you so much, Dave. And thanks to all of you who have hung on. We threw a lot of information at you and appreciate all the speakers. I just want to thank everyone for the presentations and all of the information. If you still have questions, we can open it up to questions. Now I know a few folks have submitted questions in the Q&A, which we've tried to kind of be answering live, but at this point, feel free to put a hand up if you have a question online. We can take questions. We just have a couple folks here in the room with us still, but if you all have questions, we can just open it up at this point. Maybe we've answered most of your questions, but are there any?
Sure.
Yeah. But here, hang on. Let's take your mic just so the folks on the Zoom can hear. Is that going to work, Nadia?
Yeah.
Okay. We're taking one question in the room, so hold tight. Okay.
Thank you. I'm encouraged to see gathering more data about e-bike classes in incident reports. Recently in Davis, there was a fatal crash with what was briefly hit news reports as a modified Class 2 device. And that was quickly redacted because it was part of an ongoing investigation by the Davis Police Department. So on one hand, we're fighting the messaging war of what is an e-moto versus an e-moped or a legal e-bike. How would this bill try to capture modified legal e-bikes?
So my short answer, and then I'd love to look to Matt or others to chime in. So once you've modified the bike, that actually no longer makes it a legal device.
Exactly.
So it won't be street legal once it's been modified. So
all the news reports around the certain incidents say an e-bike. And in the first day that this news report hit,
yeah,
it was mentioned that the bike was modified to go 40 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Those details got omitted from the news reports. And so now all articles about this particular crash say an e-bike.
I think that is one of the real challenges. I mean, I think part of what our bill doesn't do, it does clearly clarify, right? Matt got into detail about how it clarifies, what is and what isn't and where these devices fall. The education piece, both with the media and also with law enforcement and, folks working at the hospitals to help them understand the differences. That is still some work that needs to be done.
I can respond to that. I just had a conversation with Associated Press about this topic because once again they had reported a e-moto crash that was reported as an e-bike. Well, the word e-bike is acceptable by AP, even though it has no actual legal definition. Whereas they don't recognize e-moto as being a particular type of vehicle, so they do not allow that word to be used, especially in a headline. So, it's a New York Times article where, it's about a crash in Marin primarily that was not an electric bicycle, but the headline, of course, said e-bike. So this is something we're working on, but it's a difficult and perhaps why we keep seeing the actual vehicle kind of misrepresented in the press.
We got a few questions from the registration when people registered. And I wanted to go to one, what kind of infrastructure seems most promising to prevent e-bike injuries? And I am just going to take this one and I'm going to say the most protected, separated infrastructure that we can get is the type of infrastructure that is going to prevent the most injuries. I think the report showed that a lot of the collisions are between e-bike riders and motor vehicles. And one of the ways we can prevent those collisions is by separating those users. You know, you do hear a lot of the, oh, they came out of nowhere. We do also hear about, oh, those teenagers doing those wheelies. And one thing I like to tell people is teenagers have been doing teenager things on whatever device is available since anyone has been able to be a teenager. So it doesn't matter if it's a regular bike, 2 feet on their legs, or an e-bike or an e-moto, they will do whatever teenagers do. And providing a safe place that's separated from motor vehicle traffic is going to be the best way to do that. Many of our communities are increasing their planning for this. We lack, in some cases, political will, in many cases, in most cases, we lack money. So more money for more protected infrastructure is the answer to that question. I don't know.
This is Mark Fuchsovich, from Street 12. I'll add one thing. I'm gonna maybe play the anxiety agent in this response, which is that the one thing that we don't know is if e-bike riders would benefit from a specific type of infrastructure for them, or if there's ways that we need to be changing our standards for e-bikes. But I think at this moment, like to Kendra's point, like we just need separated infrastructure at its baseline. Like that's really the bare minimum we can be asking for. And I think like we should be demanding and deserving as riders. But to some of the points that were raised in the report, in the Mineta report, that like there could be some like special demarcation or special type of bike lane or different standards for e-bike riders as e-bikes gain popularity. We don't know that or have those recommendations yet that exist at this time.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. I'll add one more safety benefit of having more protected bike lanes, which is that it reduces the likelihood the bicycle will be on the sidewalk, which is legal, by the way, in California and in most communities, unless expressly prohibited by local law. But, you know, a lot of the concerns of pedestrians who feel threatened, even if they don't necessarily actually get hit, would be completely removed if the bikes weren't on the sidewalk. And most people won't bike on the sidewalk if they think there's a safe, somewhere else safe to do it.
All right, well, thanks everyone. We are at 90 minutes. So if you have made it this far, we appreciate you so much for hanging with us. And thank you for your questions. If you still have more questions, we will share the slides and our contact information after the webinar with those who registered. So you should all get more information from us. Do please reach out on any of the bills we talked about, especially SB 1167. Yeah, thank you so much for your interest in this topic. And thanks again to all the speakers and to Senator Blakespear for sponsoring this policy briefing. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Jeannie.